Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
Now, the question we asked bright and early is, what's wrong with training and how do we fix it? Coming to join us is Joan Underwood, who is a talent coach, development specialist, master trainer, change practitioner, and all the other names that we can get behind there. And of course, we've been hearing a lot of buzzwords over the last 2 years: upskilling, retooling, retraining. What does this all mean, and does it truly translate to us doing better in the workplace? Good morning to you, Joan.
Good morning, Tisha.
Hey, great to see you. And this is a fantastic topic. I'm very enthusiastic about it, as you can tell. All right, so first of all, what has gone wrong with training? Or, are we doing it right?
So, unfortunately, we often get it wrong. And one of the mistakes that we make is assuming that training is this silver bullet, this magic elixir that's going to fix anything and everything. Whenever things aren't going the way that we want them to, you often hear, oh, the people need training. Well, not necessarily so. Training is designed to close gaps, performance gaps related to knowledge, skills, and abilities. But there are many other reasons that we could have a performance gap. It could be a personal issue with the individual. It could be a lack of enabling environment, so they don't have the requisite resources that they need, whether those be material resources, equipment, proper policies and procedures, managerial or supervisory support. So it's important for us as HR practitioners to guide and advise and to help to diagnose the root cause of the performance gap so that we don't end up using training to try to fix a problem that is not associated with a lack of knowledge or skills, but to some other factor, and thereby requiring some other type of intervention.
In a number of organizations, training is often supply driven as opposed to demand driven as well. Let's talk a bit about that.
Yes. So, for example, one approach to training is okay, I have a budget, so let me see what's out there. So, you may go to a catalog or to a website and say, okay, oh, here, that looks interesting. And then you nominate people or ask people to volunteer and you send them off. The problem with that is that you diagnose what the knowledge and skills gaps are with your people. You haven't aligned your training agenda to the organizational strategic plans and objectives. So training needs to be demand driven as opposed to supply driven if we are to derive optimal benefits. What do I mean by demand driven? Our training agenda should be informed by a needs assessment or a needs analysis. And there are a couple of ways we can approach it. If we look at an organizational level, you have certain goals and objectives. What knowledge, skills, competencies do we need in order to fulfill these objectives? Then what do we have currently? And then we have a training agenda that will close the gap between what we need and what we have. So that's at the organizational level. If you look at it from an individual level now, each employee should have a development plan. That development plan would take into consideration not just where the employee is now in terms of the current roles and responsibilities, but what's the projected career path? Where do you see this employee going? What future contributions do you see them making to the organization? And so, what do we need to do to support them in acquiring the requisite skills and competencies? And you mentioned before, upskilling, cross training may be something that is warranted. But demand driven is how we ensure that training is fit for purpose.
And I love that you talked about having clear cut training objectives. This calls for having a plan for your organization and for the people who are helping you to achieve your strategic goals and your day-to-day goals as well, to be able to reach or realize these strategic goals. So, what advice would there be for if we're talking to average employees to be able to feed into that general or overarching plan of training? Is it a conversation then that you think you can have with your HR practitioner?
Not just with the HR practitioner, and this is something that as HR practitioners, we emphasize that it needs to be a partnership because your supervisor or line manager needs to be part of the conversation too. Because at the end of the day, they are accountable for the performance of their department. They have certain human resources at their disposal, and they are expected to get things done with and through the people assigned to them. So it's a tripartite arrangement where you have the employee in question who needs to have a voice, have a say in the conversation, the supervisor or line manager, and your HR business partner in terms of here's the role we see this employee playing, here's the contribution we see them making. This is what they currently possess in terms of the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they bring to the table. And here's the projected path in terms of where they need to go in terms of their development plan. And then HR now partner in through that partnership helps to source and procure the requisite training. Now, it's very important to begin with the end in mind at the macro level, as I've just described, but also when you get into the design, the content of the training program, because you may identify, okay, there's a gap in terms of if we're looking at a manager or supervisor, this person doesn't delegate effectively. He or she tries to do everything, they get involved in micromanagement. So we think that they could benefit from some training in relation to effective delegation. The next question from there is what would success look like? What do you expect this person to know? What do you expect them to do as a result of participating in this training? And so if it's something that's bespoke training where it's designed for you and your organization, then you need to engage the designer and say, these are the exit competencies that we need. This is what we want to accomplish. So the designer designs with that in mind. If you're doing an open enrollment program now, you need to examine the objectives of each program clearly to ensure that it aligns with what you're seeking to accomplish. If you don't, then you spend the money on the training, you don't see the change in behavior that you're looking for, and training gets a bad rap.
I really love that. What does success look like? Far too many programs are just there to be a line item that's checked off on a list, and there's no follow up to figure out if it was truly what you needed it to be for your organization and for your employees. I find that a lot of training programs as well are also, there's so much information packed into very short sessions, and it's almost like you're rushing through it. And then you really don't give people the opportunity to internalize the information and see how it can truly relate to what they do.
Absolutely. Now, ultimately, your objective is to see an improvement in performance, right? So, what does that improvement look like? And how do we ensure or put ourselves in the best position to realize it? And you spoke about cramming too much in. And this, again, it's important when we're dealing with training that we understand design principles. We understand the principles of adult learning. Because after a certain time, we just cannot process any more information. So one of the things that we advocate with effective design is chunking, breaking things down into manageable portions so that you don't overwhelm or overload your learners. Something else that needs to be taken into consideration is the fact that there's actually something called the forgetting curve. So if you go to a training initiative uh, today you may retain 100% of everything that you learned. But within 7 days, if you don't start using that newly acquired knowledge, if you don't refresh yourself in terms of revisiting it, within 7 days, you would have lost 40% of it. Within 7 days, you would have lost 40% of it. That's the forgetting curve. So In designing, what do you do? How do you help people to retain what they've learned and to interrupt the forgetting curve so that you don't lose it all? And one of the things that is required there is practical application to within 3 days, within 7 days, to begin to use what you've learned. But if what you learned wasn't relevant because it was supply driven as opposed to demand driven, then the individual doesn't get to use it, they lose it, and training gets a bad rap because we spent this money and I don't see any change in anything. So, what was the use of it?
Let's talk accountability quickly in the last few minutes that we have. And we can do an entire program on accountability. Everything from managers who put themselves up when they see training programs to managers who suggest people that they like or use it as a whipping tool for people that they don't or they don't want to. How are we able to truly, as organizations, make sure that we are training the people who need it best and offering equal opportunity in the organization to all employees?
Beautiful question. And it goes back to what we discussed earlier by doing the needs analysis. So it's not a favor. It's not, you're in the in crowd, so you'll get a training opportunity. It's based on, first up, what is it the organization wants to accomplish? What are our goals and objectives? What competencies do we need in order to achieve those goals and objectives? And who are the best people to deploy in pursuit of the given goals and objectives. So then we have our needs assessment, so we have our training agenda. We go through the design work that I spoke about before to ensure that the programming is fit for purpose. Then remember, we spoke about the enabling environment. So management has a responsibility to ensure that the employees who benefit from training have the opportunity to apply the lessons learned on the job. And remember, we defined success. We said what we wanted the exit competencies, the performance to look like. So again, managers have a role to play through the performance management system to see whether or not the employee is performing as you had targeted them to, as you had anticipated. Accountability also applies to the individual employees. We've invested in you. You've invested your time. We may have paid for the training. Now, here's what we expect you to deliver, and we're going to give you feedback on that and continue to support you to help you to take your performance to the next level. HR has an accountability. We manage the training budget. So when we've done our needs analysis, we've come up with our training agenda, we've selected the programming and said, here's how we can meet the needs that we have. We need to be able to stand behind what we've recommended. So was it fit for purpose? Did it do what it was supposed to do? Was it cost effective? Was it relevant? So multiple layers of accountability are required if we're going to get training right.
President of the Human Resources Management Association of Barbados, HRMAB, thank you so much, Joan Underwood. Always great listening to you. And I could go on for a million more questions. So look forward to talking to you next time. But you can check them out online at hrmab.org.bb. Thank you so much, Joan.
You're most welcome.
All right, training, retooling, reskilling, upskilling, all this stuff, look into it. And most importantly, equal opportunities for your employees, all right? Keep it accountable.
Morning, morning, morning.